Ludmilla picked up their pace, and they approached the farming village amidst the height of its harvest activities. All along the road, they passed carts waiting to be filled with the sheaves of oats that had been bundled after being cut and left to dry. Undead beasts drew their loads into the warehouse section of the village to be processed. Beside her, Isabella eyed the looming walls before them. "When people say village," she said, "they usually don't think of whatever it is you've built here. I thought you'd be dumping us in some rural hamlet, safely away from everyone else, but this is more like a heavily fortified town. I haven't seen anything like this since I was a little girl." "The buildings inside are much larger than your average cottage," Ludmilla told them, "and the layout of the common area is quite spacious. Half of the village is for storage, but there are only around 200 people living here right now. There's enough living space for around 250, so, despite appearances, it would only be considered a large village anywhere else." They ascended the village approach, and the paved street opened up to provide a view of the market square after they made their way inside. Large pavilions had been raised, half occupied by tables as preparations for the harvest celebrations were made. A number of the storefronts and main buildings, such as the temple and smithy, were still vacant, but the village still gave off the overall feel of being busy. At the edge of the market square, Ludmilla turned to address Morin. "Thank you for taking the time out of this busy season to welcome your associates, Mr. Bohr," she said. "Ah, it's no problem, my lady," he bobbed his head. "We're well on schedule, so a few hours away doesn't hurt much. Will you be joining us for our discussion in the workshop?" That'll probably take a lot longer, and I shouldn't be away from the job for too long. Thank you for the offer though." Morin removed his cap and bowed slightly before heading off towards his home. "I'll never figure out why that guy favored farming in the end," Isabella told Ludmilla after he disappeared into a side lane. "He picked up magic pretty quick, too. Some things just have a way of working out in the greater scheme of things," Ludmilla said musingly. "If he had not done so, he would not have ended up here to introduce you and your associates. May. I don't much like the idea that I'm just a pawn moving around for the sake of some bigger plan." Ludmilla supposed that someone who was trying to permanently escape death's clutches would feel that way. She led the pair into the entrance of the light tower, where there were two women seated along a row of chairs in the lobby, awaiting service. Another was speaking to the elder lich at the desk. Isabella turned to join the queue as well. Ludmilla grabbed her arm and dragged her away. "That one works here, right?" she asked, looking over her shoulder. "Yes, but you are not to interfere with the work of my administrative staff," Ludmilla told her. "If there is one way to get on their bad side, it would be by interfering with their duties." They went up the spiral stairs running up the inside of the tower to the second floor, and she paused in front of the door. "Your workspace is the northern wing of the second floor," she told the two mages, "while your office and residences are on the third, right above them. The southern wing of this floor is reserved for the village archives. It shouldn't require saying, but entry is prohibited to all but security and administrative staff." Ludmilla directed the Death Knight to drop off their luggage above before heading into the corridor. The smell of fresh pine from the timber frames of the building still suffused the air, and the light from the window at the end of the corridor reflected off of the polished, granite floors. She withdrew a key from her bag and unlocked the door to the north wing. The interior was bare of furnishings or any equipment that might be required, giving the space a cavernous feeling. The wing itself was 20 meters wide and twice as long, with tall, iron-barred windows spaced all along the walls. Isabella and Chandler followed her inside, pulling their cowls back. They slowly paced about, looking around with wide eyes. All of this is for us?" Isabella's voice echoed off of the stone. "It is. This would cost a fortune in the city." Isabella returned from wandering around. "Why? Why are you giving us this much?" "The light tower was originally designed this way," Ludmilla told her. "The wings were intended to house future government facilities, and a workshop for your craft happened to become one of them. Besides, this isn't the city. I have a lot of space and little in the way of industry at the moment." "Then, what is it that you have in mind for us, my lady?" Were it a month previous, her heart would have wavered over what she would tell them next. With her continuing studies on the matter, however, She was able to firmly settle herself on the direction that she wished to take. The solidifying sense of what revenues the harvest would bring in made her realize that it would most likely be her best, and possibly only, window of opportunity to do so. A handful of things, Ludmilla said. The first has to do with the proposal that you and your associates made before coming here. Everything in this domain is mundane, and I intend to change that. These village workshops will produce magic items primarily for civilian use, from lighting to storage to all manner of conveniences that you might find in a cosmopolitan city. Once you've fulfilled local demand, you will produce exports for the harbor and the river trade. What about equipment and materials? Isabella crossed her arms, and her eyes turned sharp. Enchanting doesn't just require the enchanter. Also, we most likely don't have the spells for everything that the people might want to use. I thought it best to wait for your arrival before ordering anything in. My knowledge of enchanting is essentially non-existent, so your consultation would be much appreciated. If any costs accompany what you require to learn spells for enchanting, I will finance them as well. So this workshop isn't a private business? Isabella turned to look around again. Correct, Ludmilla nodded. Rather than a private business holding tenancy, you and any of your associates who come to work here will be employees of an industry fully owned by House Saradnik. Your accounting will be submitted to the Elder Lich here, to be delivered to me. The living space above is provided by you, as well? Medical treatment, too, though it's limited to tinctures and potions until some priests move in, unless you don't mind healing from demi-human mystics. Will we receive a wage in addition to what you're providing? Of course, Ludmilla said. The current schedule of wages is based on what sort of work you are doing, and the mana costs associated with your tasks. It is something of an experimental concept at the moment, but it should be competitive to what you would earn in other nations once everything else is factored in. Then how about research costs? Isabella asked. This sort of thing is usually a side job for us. If you can justify its applications, Ludmilla answered, I'll be more than happy to consider it. Anything else will be out of your own pocket, and on your own time. You are free to pursue what you wish, as long as it does not run afoul of the law. I see, you said that there were a handful of things? There are 2 more, major responsibilities that will be a part of your job. Yes. Standardized education is being introduced to my domain. Reading, writing and simple mathematics will be taught by someone else, but I am also including basic familiarity with magic and the control of the undead summons used as labor, which the employees of this workshop will be responsible for. Wait a minute, you want us to teach classes? When Morin mentioned it, I thought he was referring to apprentices. That would be the next part, Ludmilla told her. Out of the classes you instruct, those with an aptitude for magic that express an interest in formal studies will be taken as apprentices. The first few groups might be a bit large, but, ideally, each employee of the workshop will have 2 or 3 apprentices at any given time. With 4 employees per village workshop, it should come out to about 20% of every generation being educated as an apprentice. Once the temples start being staffed, religious education will be included as well, and another 10% of each class at the minimum will be trained as acolytes. Isabella crossed her arms as Ludmilla spoke and, by the end, she was staring up at the ceiling. I know we made a case for a more favorable distribution of magic casters, she said after looking back down, but I don't think anyone actually believed that it could happen. So around 1 in 3 of your subjects will be a magic caster of some sort, and everyone will be familiar with magic in general. I thought that part of your proposal was particularly important, Ludmilla said. We are the Sorceress Kingdom, after all. Having our population illiterate and ignorant of magic wouldn't really reflect that very well. Unlike the well-developed portions of this duchy, my domain has a small population where such a change in demographics can be handily achieved at an affordable cost. I suppose that makes sense. I'm not sure if the numbers will work out as nicely as you want, but these apprentices are to receive a general magic education? Yes, it will be your responsibility to show them the world that magic offers, after which they will decide on the course they will pursue. In the future, we might be able to have specialized instructors for the role, but you and your associates are all we have for the time being. I'm putting a great deal of trust in you. Isabella pursed her lips in thought, and Ludmilla quietly awaited her response. She roughly knew what she wanted to achieve in terms of the overall direction of her fief, but local information was non-existent when it came to this sort of magical education. According to the materials from the Magician Guild, apprenticeships for mages were either funded by the apprentice, who would pursue their studies at their own pace, or done on the job, where the apprentice's general vocation would already be decided. The process was informal and not standardized in any overarching way. In practical terms, it was no different than how a tailor, blacksmith or woodsman treated their own apprentices. Like these other industries, apprenticeships were also dependent on the demands of the market. Ludmilla could not rely on these reactive behaviors to provide what she required, else she would be constantly behind her forecasted needs. I feel like all of our research time just disappeared, Isabella mumbled. How did you operate before coming here? Ludmilla was curious. Well, like I said, creating magic items was a side job. I'd do as much as I needed to pay for everything, then all of my time went into research. Does your research require mana? Only when testing out theories and collecting data, I guess. Then how long does it take to enchant something? It's mostly waiting for mana and shipments of materials to come in, but enchanting has its own research as well, especially if you want us to be doing all that you've outlined. What about your apprentices? What about them? They can't help in some way? Maybe with organizing reagents to be prepared and some menial chores around the workshop, Isabella explained. But enchanting isn't like some sort of production line. People can't just drop in and help you carry stuff or work on bits and pieces to put together like some kind of physical labor. It's the enchanter that does the actual enchanting from start to finish. Apprentices will be able to start making their own magic items once they learn first-tier spells, but the rates of advancement are dependent on each apprentice. Ultimately, however, you're going to have a glut of first and second tier mages, so this rate for mana usage you're planning on will have to factor in the tier of magic being used. I see, you'll have to pardon my ignorance on the matter. What I've had to go on is fairly limited. The materials from the Magician Guild suggested as much, but I was hoping that methods might differ from place to place. They might be by a bit, Isabella told her, but most of the difference in the production of magical items would come from the demands of the local markets. Broadly speaking, commonly seen utility goods such as lighting, long-term storage or water sources will be produced everywhere, using the same methods. Ludmilla looked around the empty wing, pondering over what she had learned. The conduct of the Xenon members wasn't as bad as she had feared it would be so far. She had pictured them as some sort of rebellious, subversive group that would have to be wrangled into compliance from the start. Isabella was a bit outspoken and lacking in proper protocol, but appeared to be mostly accommodating of the ideas that she presented. Ludmilla's gaze rested on Chandler, who had been silent throughout the discussion. Is there a reason why you haven't said anything this entire time, Chandler? She asked him. Surely you must have something to share. His thin lips worked silently, but he ultimately said nothing in reply. He looked down at the stone floor, sandy hair falling forward to cover his olive eyes. He was pretty chatty until we arrived at the harbor, Isabella told her. We met up at the Riestais border and he was pretty excited over everything. He's probably smitten by you? Maybe you're just his tie. Chandler's head snapped back up again, and he glared daggers at her. That was just a joke, but I guess you have your reason now? Isabella laughed weakly. Well, don't mind him too much, you just project a certain image that's bound to be popular with men and women alike. Maybe I should speak to my lady's maid about that. Why? Isabella raised an eyebrow. There's nothing wrong with it. If anything, you should be using it to your advantage. Her stance reminded Ludmilla of Leanne, who would often offer similar commentary in regards to Florian's appearance. Ludmilla didn't have the younger noblewoman's generous figure, however, so Isabella's statement felt more a barb. I'm starting to think that merchants commonly see things along those lines. Of course. Isabella grinned. If it sells, right? What am I selling, exactly? That whole noble lady knight kinda deal. You got it down pretty good. I bet people stare at you wherever you go. It's a strong strategy, pretty rare too since it's usually men running things in the countries around here. It is not a strategy that I'm going out of my way to employ, Ludmilla stated. I'd rather be recognized through my work as an administrator. Why not both? Isabella raised her hands and shrugged. No merchant ever goes, oh no, I have a good quality product, gotta make sure it has a poor image. If something has a good image, a good reputation and good quality, that just drives its value up in the eyes of your clientele. I am not some sort of product. You might not see it that way, my lady, but that's just how it works. It's strange, really, you've been tossing all these nice proposals out, and even the feel of your domain gives that same, strong impression. Yet, for all that you're doing here, you're not pushing for all of the gains you can get. A noble normally exploit your advantage for all it's worth, prestige and influence and all that. Ludmilla frowned, dissatisfaction rising in her throat. She didn't think her family had ever cared for such things. Being considered a trustworthy and reliable house was good enough, and taking advantage of their reputation felt like it would cheapen it. Everything being done to develop my domain is not driven by that sort of self-centered motivation, she told Isabella. I am ensuring that my domain and its people thrive and that His Majesty's mandates are carried out. They are duties to land and liege that I carry out willingly as a noble of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. No kidding? Isabella arched an eyebrow. Well, if it's all natural, then you don't have to worry about keeping up an act. A few enhancements to your image and more than a few people will be flinging themselves on the street in front of you, praying that you'll step on them. Ludmilla fought to keep the appalled expression off of her face, and the urge to shake the woman violently. We have digressed quite a bit here. She cleared her throat and looked between them. Were there any questions about what we went over? We'll have to figure out how to do the teaching bit. As for everything else, you sound pretty open-handed, but I'm sure there are budgetary restrictions. The instructors coming in have been specially trained by someone in the capital, Ludmilla told her. If you get together with them, you should be able to come up with something. As for the budget, you are correct, I do not have unlimited resources, but I do have plenty on hand. Any mundane furnishings can be produced locally, that includes anything you or your apprentices might need for the dormitory upstairs. Structural changes to the wing can be accomplished through the same means. Ludmilla scanned the empty room, trying to imagine what it would eventually contain. There were diagrams and descriptions in her reference materials, of course, but she had no idea what went where, how they were operated, or how crucial anything was. I am uncertain if there are any specially crafted tools that need to be imported, she said, but we can go through that after you put together a list of everything that you think you need. As for future research, I will have to weigh the benefits of each proposal and decide which ones should be prioritized. Not only will material resources be limited, but we will not have so many magic casters available that we can pursue every avenue at once. I see. Isabella turned around to look across the empty workshop once more. I was wondering what you wanted with so many magic casters. Could it be that you're trying to turn this fief into a center for magic? It is one of several things I have planned. Ludmilla smiled slightly at her conclusion. Riestis is absent of any national institutions when it comes to arcane magic, so this duchy has inherited the same problem. As you can imagine, the Sorceress Kingdom's undead do not have much of a need for most of the magical items that this workshop will be turning out, but its living citizens would certainly appreciate them. This being the case, I thought it would be a good place to start. Isabella turned back to her again, face an unreadable mask. Ludmilla wasn't sure why she was suddenly concealing her reaction. She thought that it was exactly what they asked for. Like other nations with valuable institutions, Ludmilla pressed on, the Sorceress Kingdom has strict laws and regulations regarding the protection and development of its assets. Warden's Vale is not too distant from the capital, but it is also isolated by nature, making movement easy to regulate. It will be an ideal location to raise an institute for magic once the appropriate security measures are made. The creation of magical items will be but one branch of what I intend. The knowledge and expertise that you and your associates bring will be welcome as well. Isabella and Chandler silently exchanged glances after she finished speaking. Was there something disagreeable in my proposal? Ludmilla couldn't help but ask. No, Isabella answered quickly. Not on a broad level, anyways. The specific details will obviously need to be hammered out over time, but things have turned out to be the opposite of what we initially expected. What were you expecting, exactly? Considering that you were a noble of Riestis, basically. The majority of them are ignorant and dismissive of magic and magic casters. That's why we ended up trying to sell you on the idea of magic items being necessary for a growing domain, to appeal to a noble's more practical perspective. Instead, what we found was a home. Chandler's eyes shone. A place where our work is validated instead of shunned, where we can walk proudly in a place where all of the arcane arts can grow and thrive. You are a visionary, my lady. Mages from around the world will flock to your banner." Isabella frowned over at him and waved a hand experimentally in front of his face. His sparkly-eyed look remained unchanged. "I'm not as much of a sap as this guy here." Isabella gave Ludmilla a lopsided smile, "but he has the gist of it. If you're building what I think you're building, you'll have a lot of mages coming your way eventually, as long as you stop trying to suppress the image that comes with you and your fief." The last line was delivered with a mischievous wink, and Ludmilla cringed inside. "It is my hope that mages will be drawn by what we build here," Ludmilla said. "But it is something that will be long in the making, and one of many projects that will take generations to establish. I just need to carry it as far as I can in the time that I have. Or you could ask your liege to turn you into a vampire, then you can just oversee the entire thing yourself." Ludmilla wanted to sigh. Why couldn't people be satisfied with a natural lifespan? Given Isabella's strong feelings on the matter of lichdom, debating the idea with her seemed utterly futile. "If it is Lord Sursana's will," Ludmilla told her, "then it is what it is." "What's this?" Lady Sheltier asked. In the hall of her manor, Ludmilla presented the crystal decanter, its crimson content unchanged from when she had filled it. "A gift, my lady," she answered. "I'm uncertain if it's appropriate or not, but I thought it would be a nice surprise." Lady Sheltier received the decanter in both hands with a bemused expression on her face. She removed the stopper and immediately looked back at her. "This is yours. You can tell?" "Of course." Lady Sheltier held the decanter under her nose, and she closed her eyes. A faint flush appeared over her cheeks as she quietly inhaled. After a moment, she released her breath and her eyes opened again, crimson gaze glowing softly in the dim lighting. "Whatever possessed you to do this?" she asked with a hint of a smile. "It was back when I was formalizing the local laws for the Kronos," Ludmilla answered. "The Sorceress Kingdom probably has more than a few predatory species with unique needs, and the thought crossed my mind that you were a member of one of them. You mentioned that, as undead, you don't require sustenance, but I wondered if you might be at least a bit curious. One thing led to another, and, anyways, the decanter is enchanted with preservation magic, and it maintains the temperature of its contents, as well. There's no reason why it shouldn't work, but, then again, I'm not exactly an expert on this sort of thing." Her voice trailed off awkwardly. Delivering such an unexciting and long-winded explanation was decidedly not the best way to convey a gift. Lady Sheltier raised a finger, and a thin, crimson filament rose out of the opening of the crystal container. It collected into a small sphere in the air between them. "Itodaki moss." With a gesture, Lady Sheltier popped it into her mouth. Much like someone tasting wine, she appeared to roll the blood around on her tongue. Her crimson eyes grew bright, then dimmed, and then she swallowed. Her expression settled, gaze focused on nothing in particular. After several moments, she replaced the stopper, pressing the decanter to her breast. "Was there anything wrong with it?" Ludmilla finally dared to ask. "The magic item appears to have kept its contents fresh and warm," Lady Sheltier replied absently, "if that was your question." Lady Sheltier's thoughtful expression returned, and the silence grew long between them. "Do I really taste that bad?" Lady Sheltier blinked and turned her gaze up at her curiously. She brought the crystal decanter up between them, slowly swirling the content within. "Blood carries within it the essence of life." The chime of her voice was quiet, yet clear. When a vampire takes the blood of her prey, she can taste everything that they are at that moment. The panic and rush of flight, grief and desperation, terror and despair, those are the usual flavors that we come to enjoy. We are predators who savor the thrill of the hunt, and the emotions associated with a successful pursuit are carried by the blood of our quarry. I personally prefer to stretch things out to develop the taste, if the situation allows for it. The container disappeared into Lady Sheltier's inventory, and she came forward until mere centimeters remained between them. "As you might be able to imagine," she said lightly, "that's not what your blood tasted like." "You have my apologies, my lady," Ludmilla said. "I've heard similar stories of how predatory species savor the taste of their prey. I suppose I should have considered it from that angle as well." "I'm not saying that it's bad," Lady Sheltier's eyes glimmered in amusement. "Just different. I've never actually had the like before, and I suspect that blood with these particular qualities is exceedingly rare to obtain." Her liege looked up at her, and the glimmer in her eyes transformed into a coquettish smile. "And you're right, I was very curious. I will treasure your gift, Ludmilla. I'm pleased to be able to provide something of value to you, my lady," Ludmilla said. "Though you should probably enjoy it at your leisure. Humans do eventually recover from blood loss, so I can provide you with more every once in a while." Lady Shaltir let out a short laugh, stepping away lightly. "I suppose that sort of reasoning shouldn't come as a surprise at this point, coming from you. Did you have any difficulties doing this?" Ludmilla glanced to the side, where Amelia was quietly attending to them. She still paled whenever Ludmilla mentioned it, and clearly shied away at the sight of blood. "Well, human blood, at least. It required a couple of attempts," Ludmilla said. "The first time, I thought I could just restore the lost blood using a healing potion. I'm sure it just mysteriously vanished right in front of your face. You know about this?" "I do," Lady Shaltir nodded. "It was the result of some research from a while ago. Detached portions of the body disappear when healing magic is cast on the injured target, so those portions have to be rendered into some other product so that the magic doesn't recognize it. It's of no help to us since I take my blood fresh." "I see. I suppose this result was from some sort of study with livestock." Ludmilla pondered the information. "It might be a bit cruel, depending on what is harvested and the methods used, but it's probably better than slaughtering living things that take years to raise. It would be more cost-effective, as well, especially if something highly valuable is derived." "Yes, that's exactly right." Lady Shaltir smiled and nodded. "All sorts of materials can be harvested and processed, and healing spells can restore everything. Do you have plans to implement this concept in any form?" "I'm experiencing a shortage of temple staff for the human population at the moment," she replied. "The majority of the Kronos are druids, but they prefer to live in their alpine isolation. The Lizardmen will also be bringing their own mystics, but I'm uncertain if they'll have mana to spare outside of servicing their own communities. Exploring this application for healing magic will need to wait until we're in a more comfortable situation with local priests, or secure a cost-effective source of magic items." "Well, I'll certainly be looking forward to that," Lady Shaltir told her. "You know, I was thinking of doing that with the frost dragons. The two that were killed back then yielded a wealth of materials." "Is that so? I'm uncertain if you'll be able to find any willing participants, though I suppose it would depend on what you're planning to harvest from them. If you do, however, I'm sure that some of the local merchants would pay handsomely for that sort of thing. The revenues generated could go into improving the transportation network." "Perhaps. Perhaps. We're still far too busy to experiment with things at the moment, and the dragons are still getting settled into their routines. We'll have to revisit the idea sometime later. Shall we get going?" "Of course, my lady." They left the manor hall of Warden's Vale, strolling down the village lane. Men and women stopped to silently pay their respects to them, or stare at Lady Shaltir. Ludmilla was certain the latter was more likely, as it was the first time they had probably seen her liege. The mid-morning sun glared down at them from the clear skies, and Lady Shaltir brought out her parasol. "Is it true that vampires are weak to sunlight, my lady?" "Low-level vampire spawn are severely hampered by sunlight," Lady Shaltir replied. "Once one gets to around the level of my vampire brides, it's just a reflexive annoyance, at worst." Lady Shaltir twirled her parasol as they made their way down the hill and over the bridge, stopping midway to look north over the floodplain. The waters had receded considerably with the continued dry weather, and Chief Issess grew alarmed at the trend. Lord Mayor's suggestion for the valley floor was just the thing that everyone appeared to need, assuming that it would work out as well as was hoped. "Lady Zaradnik?" Lady Shaltir's voice drew her out of her thoughts. "Apologies, my lady," she replied. "I was just reviewing some major changes that were on the way." "Is that so? I thought you might have become anemic after losing all of that blood. Speaking of which, you should let me do it next time, there would be less mess and fuss." "How would that work, my lady?" "The same way as you observed earlier," Lady Shaltir told her. "I can just draw the blood welling out of a cut and send it over into the decanter." "I see. I thought that you'd just bite me." "As much as I would like to," her liege's lip twitched upwards, "that wouldn't be very wise. The necrotic curse that I inflict on living beings prevents natural and magical recovery, so you wouldn't be able to heal until it is addressed. Taking your blood directly would also tempt me in various ways, so I might get just a bit carried away, despite my intentions. Ludmilla stared out across the landscape again. Lady Sheltier's words reminded her of a point that had been brought up not too long ago. Don't tell me I've finally managed to frighten you with something. Her liege's voice rose to tease her. My convictions remain unchanged from back then, my lady, Ludmilla replied. I am yours, for as long as you would have me. However, if you wanted to do something to me, you could have at any point before now. That came up in a discussion recently, actually. What has? A couple of those members of Xenon that we discussed some time ago arrived about midway through the harvest, she said. One of the topics broached was their envy over how I could request to be turned into a vampire at any time. That I could have immortality, free of the cage they believe imposed upon them by life. Lady Sheltier's fingers wrapped lightly around Ludmilla's elbow, and she tilted her parasol slightly to come closer. Is this something you desire, Ludmilla? Her silvery voice took on a silken quality. I hadn't considered it before that point, my lady. But you have now, yes? Yes, my lady, she swallowed. In the end, I told them that I would rather face death by the grace of Lord Sursana. I mean no offense by this, of course. Lady Sheltier leaned her head against Ludmilla's arm. I'm pleased that you aren't a fool, she said. A fool? Yes. What they suggested to you was foolish to the extreme, the words of those with a shallow understanding of what it means to undergo such a transformation. They only consider it as a shortcut to immortality, without any regard for the consequences. Lady Sheltier started walking towards the far side of the bridge, drawing Ludmilla along with her. They were halfway up the slope to the terraces before she spoke again. If you were someone that the Sorceress Kingdom valued solely for your personal martial strength, then perhaps it would be a good idea to turn you. Becoming a vampire does make you far stronger, after all. Your value, including what stems from the relationship we now enjoy, will be adversely affected as a result of being turned. As they continued to walk along, a pair of Death Knights carrying a tree trunk came down the road in the opposite direction. Their gazes followed them briefly in passing. Do you understand what it means to be a pet, Lady Zaradnik? Lady Sheltier asked her, a thrall? Ludmilla shook her head in response. I imagine that you consider yourself a loyal vassal, Lady Sheltier said, and I believe that most humans would consider you extraordinarily so. This loyalty, however, is fundamentally different from the relationship between a mistress and their thralls, pets or summons. I'm fairly certain that you've already recognized this in your interactions with His Majesty's undead servitors. I have recognized hints to those behaviors, yes, Ludmilla nodded. But I find that, as long as everything is done in accordance with His Majesty's will, any disagreements that arise are more along the line of debates over the methods and thinking we employ to accomplish our tasks. You have a high degree of empathy, even for His Majesty's servitors, and your flexibility and willingness to accommodate others have earned you remarkable results when it comes to their integration. I believe this has heavily skewed your views on their nature, so I shall explain how things actually are. Lady Sheltier paused for a moment, expression fixed in thought. As one of my vampire thralls, she said, you may perhaps feel that you're still yourself. The truth, however, is that you will be compelled to serve, obey and please me in any manner possible. At the thought of your mistress, all reason will fly away, all of your strength and intellect will be focused into a single-minded drive to fulfill my desires. You will leap into any hazard and commit any deed in my name, without question or consideration for yourself or anyone else. Now, does that sound like the behavior of Ludmilla Zaradnik? No, my lady, Ludmilla answered. While I will strive to serve you faithfully, I would still consider the meaning and consequences of my actions on a much larger scale. I believe that this, too, is an important part of being a loyal vassal, to be mindful of how my liege may be affected by my service. If I perceive that there are flaws or improvements in your directives, I will bring them to your attention. Indeed, Lady Sheltier said, so you should understand why I consider it a foolish move, in your case. To turn you would be to throw away the very reason that you exist as my vassal, for it will destroy who you are. You will be incapable of providing me honest counsel, because you will, from that point onwards, be unable to oppose your mistress. Every step of development in your domain, all of your policies, decisions and actions would be in consideration of my personal preferences, in deference to my every taste and whim. You would become nothing more than a slightly different sort of vampire bride, to be employed for lesser tasks, or used for my personal pleasure. Though Lady Shaltir spoke as if it were an undesirable thing, her grip on Ludmilla's elbow tightened. Her lige's crimson eyes shone brightly, even in the daylight, and her tongue slowly ran over her lips. Her true appearance nearly slavered at her words, long tongue rasping over thousands of needle-sharp teeth. Lady Shaltir did not miss Ludmilla's look. "Don't let my expression fool you," she smiled slightly. "Despite how tantalizing the prospect is to my carnal nature, it's not something I would rationally desire for in our current circumstances." "Not long after I encountered the Kronos," Ludmilla said, "one of their Volk mentioned that vampires can release their thralls. They've only studied things from a distance, however, so I'm uncertain whether it's true or not." "It's not something I've ever attempted, to be honest," Lady Shaltir said. "There is a limit to the number of powerful vessels I can turn, and I suppose if I reach that limit, any extras would run around free. Well, it's something I would have to ask His Majesty's permission to attempt, and I'm unwilling to lose you over an experiment." She drew closer to lean on Ludmilla's arm again as they walked along. "For the moment," she smiled, "we shall just have to settle for something like this. Your value lies far beyond simply being my plaything, and you've already proven your worth many times over." They brought that idea up as well. Ludmilla faced forward again. "That a nation like the Sorceress Kingdom would strive to retain valuable talent through similar means." "We do have the means," Lady Shaltir told her, "but the nature of the candidate warrants careful thought. There are many options that fit humans of various dispositions, but you are quite the difficult one to pin down. We could transform an evil individual into a demon or the opposite sort into an angel, but I figured the best fit for you would be some sort of plant." "A plant?" Ludmilla imagined herself buried waist-high in an earthenware pot, sitting on a windowsill somewhere doing paperwork. Would she be green in color and sprout blossoms every spring? Maybe she would bear fruit, creating thousands of seedlings every year. It would certainly resolve her future issues with finding a consort. "Yes," Lady Shaltir nodded, "a plant heteromorph of some kind. At first, I thought, maybe a construct like an automaton, or a golem, but I decided that it didn't quite fit. There's the issue of your class build as well. You may have some job classes that specifically require your being a human, and that would end up in an awful mess. Also, now that I've had a taste of you, the idea of a plant heteromorph has lost the little luster it had. Despite what people might think, vampires have no particular preference for tomato juice or the like." "I didn't realize that there was so much to consider, my lady, or that you had the tool." "Well, those people that you spoke to did have a point there," Lady Shaltir said. "Any extraordinarily useful and loyal individuals will, of course, merit consideration. In the end, the requirements involved in this sort of transformation means that it would be at your discretion, but I would be quite disappointed if you refused." They continued onwards up the road to the village, through the fields of stubble. Already, the farmers were turning the soil and preparing to sow the autumn crops. They would be planting oats again for this season, and Ludmilla wondered how the duchy's overall harvest would affect her revenues for the next harvest. Lady Shaltir had arranged today's meeting in order to experiment with something in regards to shipping the harvest. Ludmilla had not been able to secure a shipwright for new vessels, so she was in dire straits when it came to her cargo capacity. Clara had promised to purchase her exports. She was already monopolizing all of the stone and timber shipped out of Warden's Vale, and Ludmilla felt utterly ashamed at her rate of delivery. Thoughts of Clara made her realize that her friend was most likely the prime candidate for transformation into some sort of immortal being. What she had accomplished thus far outstripped every other noble in the duchy combined, and it was unlikely that the Sorceress Kingdom would let her die of old age if they could help it. Would Clara accept their proposal? If so, Ludmilla decided she would as well, if only to keep her closest friend company. But how would their gods feel about that? Would they lose their divine favor? Would they even have any business promoting the welfare of humanity as non-humans? Loyalty and duty, friendship and faith, everything important to her made an otherwise straightforward path difficult to navigate. "That's quite the glower you have on your face." She rearranged her expression at the sound of Lady Shaltir's voice. This whole idea about a future as some sort of immortal being is giving me quite a lot to consider, my lady.
Is that so?
Well, in that case, I look forward to your favorable response should the time come.
Ludmilla considered showing Lady Shaltir around the now completed farming village, but, after imagining a pair of crazed Cernorn members jumping out of the light tower to do some unspeakably shameful thing to her liege, she decided against it.
They walked up the ramp to the warehouse section, making their way through the gatehouse into the rows of grain silos waiting to be emptied. The straw from the harvest had been baled and stored away, and the chaff swept up for future use as well, more commodities that she had no cargo capacity for. Both chaff and straw could be used as feed, and there were also many other uses for straw, but there was still simply too much that would build up until her shipping problems were alleviated. Timber and stone, also piling up faster than she could ship out, were far too valuable of an export in the duchy at this point, so everything else just collected endlessly. Timber and stone production would fall drastically after all of her planned clearing was done, but she suspected that something else would just end up taking up her scarce cargo space. As time went on, it seemed that problems just had the tendency to be replaced by other problems. Her production issues were slowly being addressed, leading to storage and transportation problems. The boons presented by the Sorceress Kingdom had clear advantages over past methods, but properly harnessing all that it offered was an ongoing struggle. She would probably have to rebuild the old bridge sooner rather than later, but it would still have to wait until the farming strip was fully cleared. She checked around for anyone else in the storage area, but it appeared that they had shown up early. Clara was supposed to arrive by gate, along with Lady Pestonia. The warehouse section was mostly empty, save for the undead guarding the vicinity. Over the western wall drifted the sounds of the feast day festivities.
"How are things with the aerial transportation network, my lady?" Ludmilla asked as they continued to wait.
"Uneventful," Lady Shaltir replied. "Which is good in the sense that everything is operating according to schedule, but rather lacking in any excitement." "So the rumors of those frost giants haven't turned out to be true?" "Cocytus has reinforced the mountain roads," Lady Shaltir told her, "and I've reorganized our deliveries to be less susceptible to singular attempts at destroying them. So far, there hasn't been any significant change on their end, according to our observers. Despite their reputation as savage raiders, they appear to be quite organized when presented with a tangible threat. It will be interesting to see what they come up with, should they move at all."
"I understand the desire for the Adventurer Guild to make their effort first," Ludmilla said,
"but is it wise to be so passive? It feels like the frost giants are being given free opportunities to act throughout this wait."
"It might seem that way," Lady Shaltir told her, "but we aren't allowing anything of the sort.
Cocytus has taken command of the forces in the region, as a part of his ongoing desire to raise an official army for the Sorceress Kingdom. Since these frost giants are stronger than most of our other neighbors, he's been using this whole affair as an opportunity to see what sort of tactics they try to employ, and figure out how to defend against them." "You have that look on your face again." Ludmilla furrowed her brow, trying to figure out what that look was with little success.
"Which look might that be, my lady?"
"The one that always appears when you've latched onto some crucial idea." "Do I truly have such a look?"
Ludmilla asked. "You do," Lady Shaltir answered. "It's not very noticeable, but I've figured out quite a bit about you."
"So, what is it? Is there still a shortfall of individuals capable of performing conventional reconnaissance in the Sorceress Kingdom's forces?"
"Not to the point where we're incapable of defending ourselves," Lady Shaltir said, "but it is an area of weakness that is on the list of ongoing concerns. Our foremost duty is to see to the defense of His Majesty's realm, so the possibility of even minuscule damage being inflicted to his holdings is an unforgivable state of affairs if we possess the means to address it. I've heard that Lord Cocytus is trying to correct some of those weaknesses by establishing this army and training the Death Series servitors for various roles."
"That is the general idea, yes.
Why do you ask?"
"Is this possible?" Ludmilla glanced towards Lady Shaltir.
"I understand that
They possess a certain degree of intelligence and are capable of being trained to do various things, but I also know that they have some hard limitations in terms of their raw capabilities. I've only noticed things that I'm personally familiar with, yet there are dozens of weaknesses that cannot be addressed through training due to these hard limits."
"What are you proposing, exactly?"
"Nothing concrete, so far," Ludmilla replied, "but I will be starting to raise my own rangers soon. They'll be used to help eliminate my own fief's weaknesses in local defense, and I was wondering if Lord Cocytus would be interested in something along those lines as well. Cocytus would be interested in anything that might improve his new army, Lady Shiltia smirked. If you wanted my personal opinion on how relevant they would be, it would depend on how strong you could make them. If they are good enough to track and identify the majority of potential intruders along the border, then they would easily find a place in the realm's security forces. Beyond roles of a similar nature, however, their use would be negligible compared to what we can simply bury our enemies with. That's all that I was considering them for, currently. I was just wondering if there was a place for it in the realm as a whole. I'll have to see what results I can come up with before proposing the idea to Lord Cocytus. Lady Shiltia turned to look up at her, brow furrowed. Her parasol vanished, and she folded her arms. I don't understand why you continue to take this sort of approach. I'm uncertain of your meaning, my lady. Her liege released a tiny sigh. Despite all of the thinking that you do, she told her, you tend to rely on your intuition first. Has it ever led you astray? In a catastrophically bad sort of way. I have come to some wrong conclusions in the past. Too far, Lady Shiltia said. What I'm referring to are your initial hunches, instincts. Have they ever pointed you in the wrong direction? Ludmilla remained silent as she pondered the question. There is such a thing as thinking too much, Lady Shiltia told her, and I believe that it's crippling you, in some ways. Thoughtlessly following one's intuition and instincts is bound to lead to trouble, eventually. I'm not saying that you shouldn't think at all, Lady Shiltia said. Lord Peroncino knows that I've been a bit too hasty with my own intuition at times, but, as someone who also relies on it, I'm saying that you should learn to trust your own. It might seem a nonsensical risk to those who only value well-defined logic and reasoning, but you will probably find it more productive than miring yourself in too much thought. There was a lull in the wind, and the sound of the villagers celebrating rose over the western wall. Ludmilla reflexively glanced up at the noise. This has been the case so far, yes? Lady Shiltia told her, you've consulted with me on a great many things, and I've seen the results of your work. Your most prominent achievements have come to pass because you've been placed in situations where you do not have the luxury of lengthy planning, or you must willingly dive into what you consider unknown territory. Instinct and intuition correctly guide you towards favorable results, before any rational thought can be applied. It is one of your most excellent qualities, and I believe that you should rely on it more. It occurred to Ludmilla that Lady Shiltia's observation was strangely accurate. The most significant outcomes in the time since they had met did not hinge on careful planning or cunning calculation. In nearly everything that mattered, she had either been thrown into the fire and relied on her convictions to arrive at a solution, or meaningful results had been achieved without even realizing that she had been naturally working towards them. Rational methods had their place, but, more often than not, they were employed to explore what her intuition had first pointed out. You're probably correct, my lady, Ludmilla admitted. I will say that actively trying to do things that way would be quite hard for me, however. I suppose it's just something that you'll need to learn how to embrace. You are possessed of a character that strives for order, yet you thrive in chaos, skillfully navigating seas of uncertainty to achieve your objectives. If you are to think long and hard about anything, you should be considering what this means. The portal of a gate spell appeared before them, and Clara stepped out. Adorned in a long summer dress of her customary house colors, she smiled brilliantly in the midday sun when her gaze found Ludmilla and Lady Shiltia. Behind her, Lady Pestonia appeared, and the portal silently closed. They exchanged their greetings, and Lady Shiltia started discussing something quietly with Lady Pestonia. Clara joined Ludmilla where she stood behind Lady Shiltia, bumping up against Ludmilla playfully. I've finally arrived at the mysterious Warden's Vale, Clara said with a giddy air about her. I lost hours of sleep last night thinking about it. I can't imagine why, Ludmilla replied. You have a far more fabulous place at home. Humph, Clara pouted, I'll be the judge of that. Please don't judge. Ludmilla was fairly certain that she could show Clara around the village without feeling ashamed about it, but, beyond that, her domain was still the next closest thing to a wilderness. With the colossal amount of work going on in Calling County, she felt that there was nothing truly worth showing off in her domain by comparison. Lady Shiltia and Lady Pestonia completed their exchange, and they turned to face them.
"We're ready when you are," Lady Sheltier told Ludmilla.
"What was it that you had planned, my lady?"
she asked. "It's fairly straightforward," Lady Sheltier answered.
"We'll be sending your grain through a gate leading to the storage space in Corlin Harbour. All I need to know is which ones need to be emptied." "You'll be delivering all of it, my lady?" Ludmilla's mind froze.
"All that's due to be delivered?"
"Yes."
Ludmilla exchanged a look with Clara, who only smiled in return. Had she asked for this? She did have an entire county to feed. Her mind worked rapidly, trying to reorganize her development schedule in the event that she had not inexplicably entered into some sort of dream.
"Is that really all right, my lady?"
Ludmilla said, "Your mana is precious."
"That's why I've had Pestania come along," Lady Sheltier told her. "We'll balance out the mana between us and see what half of our capacity will deliver. Based on past results with other things, it should be more than enough."
"In that case," Ludmilla looked at Clara again. "The anomaly you pointed out happened. How far off were the numbers?" Clara asked. "It was exactly as you predicted," Ludmilla answered. "I knew it," Clara said.
"You picked a crop that isn't commonly grown in the lowlands, after all."
"What are you two talking about?"
Lady Sheltier leaned in between them.
"It's a discrepancy between the expectations outlined in the administration's almanacs and what the actual results should be, my lady," Clara explained. "I pointed it out to Lady Albedo a few months ago, but she wanted solid proof for my claim under the new systems. Ludmilla planted the earliest crops, so now we have a sample of the evidence that the Prime Minister asked for." "So is this a good thing, or a bad thing?" Lady Sheltier asked. "I'm afraid I have no idea what you're referring to." "I noticed that the information in the almanac was sterile," Clara said, for lack of a better way to put it. "Considering the fact that it was presented under the assumption that undead labor would be used, I suspected that the projections were put together as the results of a controlled experiment. Elder liches directing the cultivation of crops in the region, or something along those lines." "That's not exactly what it was, but you're fairly close. You picked that up just from reading a string of numbers on an almanac?" "It stuck out quite a bit to me, my lady," Clara said. "I'm certain other members of the nobility have noticed as well, but they're still stepping lightly under the new administration. The point here is that the crops in the projections provided by the almanac were not grown by farmers, but casters of some sort. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but crops managed by professional farmers produce more." "Something like a class bonus?" Lady Pestania asked. "If we were to use that style of terminology, yes," Clara answered. "Loosely speaking, farmers with some experience harvest 5% more produce. This is a general bonus, not counting any specializations. The tenants of my own domain are specialized in their respective riverland crops, so they produce even more. Since oats are not commonly grown in this region, I was able to reliably predict that this 5% bonus to the harvest would occur for Ludmilla's summer crops." "How in the world did you figure all that out in the first place?" Lady Sheltier made a face. "As long as one keeps thoroughly accurate records, they'll start to see some oddities between various tenants. Due to the ideal conditions of the riverlands, House Corlin's yield figures have always been much more reliable than most. With a bit of research, the existence of this bonus becomes readily apparent." "These farmers used undead labor," Lady Pestania noted. "Shouldn't that make a difference?" "No, my lady," Clara said. "It doesn't matter what kind of draft animals you use, nor how experienced your farmhands are. You may consider these undead laborers along those same terms." "This is excellent news, then." Lady Sheltier smiled, a pleasant surprise, to be certain. "So how much should we be moving?" 102,600 bushels, my lady," Ludmilla said. 10 of these filled silos. Each destination should have enough volume for 5 of these," Clara added. They walked up to the first in the long row of raised silos, each 10 meters in diameter and 4 meters high. Lady Sheltier called over the Death Knight standing at the closest gatehouse, sending it to the spout of the first silo. Gate. The familiar portal of the gate spell appeared, but not in the usual way. This time, it was opened horizontally below the spout of the grain silo. Ludmilla shook her head. It was an obvious application of the spell, in hindsight. Lady Sheltier nodded to the Death Knight, who pulled the lever to open the spout. The long stream of oats poured out directly into the portal.
Ludmilla could only stare as 160 tons of grain was dumped straight into its destination in Calling County within minutes. The process continued with the next silo. "Were you running low on grain?" Ludmilla asked Clara. "This entire shipment is enough to feed your entire domain for just over a month." "A bit over 5 weeks, yes," Clara answered. "We're not starving, but I wanted to have a good surplus before the rest of the duchy starts moving food around. With so many new things happening at once, you never know what sort of disruptions might occur." Lady Shiltier also has a vested interest in getting things moved over. The faster your goods are delivered, the faster you get paid and the faster she gets your taxes, yes? Clara held up a folded sheet of paper between her fingers, a copy of a transaction from the Merchant Guild. Ludmilla took the paper and opened it, then abruptly folded it again. "This is a silly number," Ludmilla said. "I still can't wrap my head around it." "Well, they do match your projections," Clara replied. "Your plans go far beyond just that, so you'd better become accustomed to it. I don't know how commodity prices will fare by winter, but I'm certain this is your best chance to get anything done. I'll be looking forward to your results as well." It occurred to Ludmilla that the true reason Clara had convinced Lady Shiltier to expedite the delivery of grain was so that their exchange could happen all at once, while prices were still at their highest. She shared a look with her friend, and Clara's lips turned up in a self-deprecating smile. Ludmilla wasn't the only self-sacrificing idiot of a human in the Sorceress Kingdom. She sniffed and grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her along to catch up with Lady Shiltier. When they reached her, Lady Shiltier was holding a hand to her ear. The Death Knight was awaiting a new gate, while she spoke aloud to someone. "Eh? What do you mean I buried Shizu? Didn't you warn her to move? Was there an accident in the harbor?" Clara asked worriedly. "That Entama," Lady Shiltier muttered. "They were probably bickering over the same thing again." Ludmilla frowned. How did an argument result in one side being buried by a shipment of grain? A new gate opened, and the Death Knight released the spout of the silo. The lack of concern over the incident was decidedly strange. "Is everything all right on the other end?" Ludmilla asked. Yes, they've already pulled her out," Lady Shiltier answered absently, then glanced over at them. "What happened between you two? You're both positively glowing." "We're just being idiots together, my lady." "Is that so?" "Yes." Ludmilla couldn't keep the smile off of her face. "Clara went and completed our transaction in advance, so you'll be receiving your taxes the next time I drop by the Merchant Guild." "May I have a look?" Lady Shiltier looked down at the invoice in her left hand. Ludmilla handed it over, and Lady Shiltier's crimson eyes went back and forth as she scanned the content. Her brow furrowed when she reached the bottom of the page. "Your taxes are 10% of this? I'll be adding what I owe for the timber and stone from this season's exports, as well. Perhaps I've been a bit too conservative with the construction of the post offices. They don't even put a dent in what I get from you. There are going to be 5 of these villages?" "Yes, my lady," Ludmilla replied. "We'll be able to move on to expanding our facilities for the aerial transportation network and working on several other things sooner than expected. It should act as a sort of head start, but I wouldn't hold hope for any of the goods produced with the direct assistance of undead labor to maintain their current prices for long. Agricultural staples will be the first to experience the eventual collapse in prices," Clara said. "I suspect that, in 3 or 4 harvests, the exports from the Sorceress Kingdom will begin to weigh on the regional markets. It's far too sudden to rebalance the duchy's agricultural sector properly, so the value of our exports will abruptly diminish until that happens, or until we gain access to new markets." "The administration still guarantees a price for grain," Lady Shiltier said. "You could always sell it to the Sorceress Kingdom." "I thought that was an emergency measure back when the city was at a standstill." "It's not," Lady Shiltier replied. "The price floor will stay on the listed goods indefinitely. Let's just say that the regional markets are not the only outlet for this duchy's production." "I see," Clara said. "Still, it will take quite a lot to have market prices tumble that far. I sincerely doubt that they ever will. Having this guarantee as a fallback is reassuring should such an unlikely event occur, but being proactive in finding new, accessible markets will net us the best long-term gains." "You already have one in mind?" Lady Shiltier asked. "A few, my lady," Clara answered. "Leanne is doing most of the research, but the stance of our little circle is that we must take the offensive. The advantages conferred by our new systems grant us tremendous economic reach. All we need are a few missing pieces in our arsenal before we can start. And here everyone sees you as some sort of angelic being.
Lady Shiltir raised an eyebrow, full goodness and warmth. A slow smile crept onto Clara's face, and she gave Ludmilla's hand a small squeeze.
Someone once told me that angels are every bit as ruthless as devils, Clara said, and I suppose she was absolutely correct. It is His Majesty's will that the Sorceress Kingdom stands as a beacon of prosperity and harmony, and so we shall carry its light to the furthest corners of the world. We'll start with something nice and manageable, of course.
The Weapon Master.
An orphan boy inheriting his father's blade, the diligent disciple calmly practicing the techniques of her venerable school. A tribal champion rising through raw, personal skill with their trusty club, a wanderer obsessed with testing his blade against the strong. The journey one initially embarks upon may vary greatly, yet all such roads to expertise lead to the puissant and deadly grace of the Weapon Master. No simple soldier, adventurer or gladiator, the Weapon Master is a warrior who has achieved such proficiency with their favored armament that it has become a natural extension of themselves. Dominating opponents with overwhelming technical expertise, power and an array of powerful martial arts, they are a spectacle to behold and a terror to face. Even the most disciplined formations and the finest of armor is often no match. They stand in the eye of a storm of martial devastation, carving bloody trails through battlefields around the world. Experienced weapon masters are coveted as instructors by nations and private individuals alike, often running branches of their own respective schools or founding entirely new ones in order to propagate crucial teachings before they are lost in their passing. They are most commonly found in the military institutions of powerful nations, who spare no expense to train the best and brightest of their warriors, facilitating the security of their lands, or the conquest of their neighbors. Rarest amongst weapon masters are those whose talents lead them to achieve the greatest heights of their craft, legendary warriors akin to the Kensei of the South, whose feats of renown inspired generations throughout the ages to set foot upon the very same path.